Hey everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life and No Bullshit Bodybuilding, and tonight I'd like to talk to you about why it is I don't typically plan deloads. Now, in thinking about this video, it did strike me that I think I've made a video about it before, about this topic, but I don't recall exactly what I said. I sense that I will offer some novel discussion here, and if nothing else, we'll bring the topic back up, and I think it's one which there is value in exploring. So, in short, I don't think, I'll frame it positively, I think one can maximize hypertrophy in the long term with a style of training which is not so fatiguing that it necessarily requires the inclusion of deloads. Now, for some context, I've perceived a shift over the past year or so in the style of programming which is popular for hypertrophy, in that it's shifting more toward being reflective of programming for powerlifting, in that you see 6 to 12 week long programs with phases like, and the terminology does vary, introductory phases which are significantly conservative relative to that which one can do. Then workload slowly increases, ultimately peaking with an overreaching phase in which one really pushes for a level of workload one perhaps hasn't done in the past, but more importantly, new muscle gain. And because that can't be sustained, it's deliberately designed to be beyond the level of work that you can sustain, fatigue accumulates and deloads are necessary. Otherwise, you simply eventually overtrain. I'm simply not convinced that this approach to training will ultimately yield better muscle gain. And when I say ultimately, I mean in the long term. I'm open to the claim that within that time frame, it might result in greater hypertrophy. And I think that which I would happily grant is that within the overreaching phase specifically, more progress will be made than would be made in the same time period if one is more conservative, because you're simply doing a lot more work. Now, we do have to get into questions of, is there such a thing as superfluous volume which doesn't yield additional gains or even would negatively affect gains, and I think both of those are possibilities. But I would say generally, one will make better progress within that phase than being more conservative. But recall that because of that aggressiveness within that phase, one then has to pull back aggressively and build back up. So in time, what you see is that workload does this, and let's say this is a 12-week period. Workload does this, and then drops back down and comes back up. In my mind, one can achieve the same long-term result by being more consistent and more conservative. So what you see in terms of increased workload is something like, and this is a much longer time period now, something like this. And because it's more conservative, and because one can design that kind of program such that it's consistently below that which is the limit of your capacity, consistently below might be an overstatement, but you wouldn't design it to deliberately exceed that for any significant period. Deloads, in the sense of lengthy pre-planned deloads, are no longer necessary. And what I favor is auto-regulation, really looking at things like how do you feel when training? How do you feel after training? How do you feel when you wake up? Interestingly, that I've found to be one of the very best markers of how you're recovering. And you can make changes even on a daily basis in response to indicators like that and continuously adjust. And again, I think ultimately make similar progress. Now, what I would grant, I originally wanted to speak to objections, but I think the way I'm going to go about that is see what folks actually bring up, and then I can address what they say. One caveat I would grant is that this probably requires a greater degree of training experience, ultimately yielding a more reliable intuition. So if you have someone who doesn't really know what it means to wake up and immediately know, okay, I'm overdoing it, I need to pull back, or maybe I need to sleep more. There are certainly other variables that ultimately go into work capacity. That less experienced person is not going to be in a good position to use this approach. So that would be someone who would either need a coach or would want to use an approach which would be more structured so that they simply follow the plan as set out initially. But for me and for folks I coach and for folks who I know are experienced enough to do this, again, I'm simply not convinced that a more structured approach which emphasizes the shorter term overreaching followed by deloads is a superior approach. So thank you so much for your time. Please like the video if you found value in it. Comment below, question of the day, which approach do you use? Or do you perceive there as being a third option? If so, what is it? Do you do it? How does it work? Do you even lift? We'll see you next time.